In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a screen for screen printing with Speedball screen filler, an embroidery hoop, and a polyester screen. With this screen filler, anywhere that you paint will resist the screen printing ink, and where you leave open mesh, the ink will go through to create your print. And you can see mine is dyed a little bit blue here because of this screen print. This is an old screen that was in an embroidery hoop. To get started, I'm going to take this bamboo embroidery hoop and loosen it up. Take your interior ring, and I'm going to cover it with masking tape. You can also do this with cloth if you don't want to put masking tape on your embroidery hoop. The polyester screen is really slippery, and so this step ensures that it will stay tight for screen printing. If your screen is loose when you're screen printing, you're not going to get a crisp print. Now I'm going to lay my polyester screen over the interior hoop, and just like we're doing embroidery, put my exterior hoop right over that and press it tight. Now I can secure it with the hardware here. I'm going to tighten it up as much as I can. And then I'm going to feel that my screen is flat and tight. And if I feel any loose spots, I'm going to gently pull on the screen to tighten it up. Once I have my screen tight and in the hoop, sometimes I will cut off a little bit of the edge. You may want to leave the edge on so you can adjust it later. I don't like to cut it all the way to the screen, just in case I need to pull on that if my hardware loosens up a little bit. But I also don't like to have a lot of extra screen because that can end up getting ink on it that will transfer to my fabric when I'm trying to print. And then I'm going to put my image down, take my screen, flip it over so the screen is touching my paper, and then I'm going to center my image. Now you want at least an inch or two around the image that you're going to print so that when you print, the ink doesn't go out and create kind of a mess underneath the frame. So I want some room that I'm painting here. I'm going to take a soft pencil like this and trace my image now. You may want to tape down your paper so that it doesn't move while you're drawing. I'm tracing the outside line here, and I'm going to paint everywhere in the background, everywhere that's white here, so that my ink goes through in the line drawing. So when I'm drawing, I actually like to give myself little X's like this every once in a while so that I remember that this is where I want to paint, not here. And then every once in a while, I like to check to see where I'm going, so I'll move my hoop a little bit to see what I've drawn so far, and then I'll just line it back up before I keep drawing. Okay, so I have my drawing. You can see I've put a few X's in to remind myself that this is where I want to paint, not the line drawing itself, because I want the ink to go through that line drawing. Now I'm going to move my drawing out of the way. I might keep it nearby so that I can reference it. I'm going to flip my frame over again. Before I start painting, I'm just going to make sure that I tighten it one more time. Now I'm going to paint on this side. So this is the opposite side from where I drew. So it's a flipped image of this. And I'm painting on this side, not my well side where I'm going to put my ink later, because if I paint on this side, it's going to stick to the surface underneath. This Speedball ink dries really hard, and if you're using a newspaper or something as a drop cloth, it will stick to it if you paint on this side. So let's flip it over. So I have two brushes here. I have a bigger one and a smaller one. I'm going to do, you may want a variety of brushes depending on what your image looks like. I'm going to use my small brush around the edges, and then I'll use my big brush to fill in the background. And just have some water here to wash out my brushes. Okay, the screen filler here, you want to shake it up. And then it's difficult to open if you have let it dry with the screen filler around the lid. So I actually worked really hard before this video to open this up. If you find that you have this, I would highly recommend washing it off with a wet cloth or a paper towel before closing your lid. It'll save you time later on. I'm going to go ahead and pour a little bit out. Yours probably won't be quite as thick as this because mine is a little bit older and has dried. And I'm going to take my own advice and wipe off the lid before I close it. If yours dries shut, use an X-Acto knife or a sharp blade of some kind to dig out the clay from here, and then you'll be able to open it up. It just takes a little bit of time. And I'm just going to start by painting around the edges. So everywhere that I put the screen filler will resist or block out the ink when I'm screen printing. And everywhere that I leave open screen, the ink will be able to pass through to create our print. And we'll be printing on cloth in class, but you can also use the same method to print on paper. When you're printing with these screens, you'll wash them out with water, and you want to wash them out with room temperature or cold water. Hot water can end up washing out the screen filler too. Usually not the whole screen filler, but parts of it. And so if that happens, you can always go and touch up your screen with a little bit of the screen filler again. So it's not a big deal if a little bit washes out. You can always go back and touch it up. Okay, so I have the outside done, and now I'm going to start painting these detail areas on the inside. And this is where it's really nice to have those X's to remember where you actually want to paint. And I just smudged this a little bit, so I'm going to take a wet cloth and try to wash that out a little bit. And when I start printing, all of these really fine details, I'm not going too fine here, I might have to touch those up or beef them up if the ink is squeegeeing around the edges a little bit too much. Okay. Now that I've finished these details, I'm going to go back, and if I see any areas, just check to see if there are any areas that I missed, and probably fill in just a second time some areas that look a little bit light. So I basically just quickly went over everything again with one more layer. Now I'm going to wash out my brush with a little water. And move to my larger brush. With this larger brush, I'm going to fill in my background. Again, anywhere that I paint will resist or block the screen printing ink, so this will stay white or the color of your fabric, and the ink will go through the areas that we're leaving open. You can see my screen's dipping a little bit there, and so I'm just going to tighten it up a tiny bit and keep painting. Okay. So before I clean up, I'm going to check two things. I'm going to check that I don't have any big drops on the inside that are going to create any like little bumps or anything for printing. I'm not worried about it being completely flat, but I have some areas where a lot of ink got through. So I'm just going to, on the back of my image, brush those. And then the other thing I'm going to check is if I hold this up to a light, if there are any fine points or areas that I missed. So it's kind of hard to see when a light is pointing at your screen like it is now. But if I hold this up to the light and look from underneath, I can see if I missed any areas. Okay, now while this dries, I'm going to wash out my brushes and wash out my tray. Everything was just washing with water. I'm going to take this to a sink and really wash it out well. And then I will be ready to print. Now this takes at least an hour to dry, maybe more depending on the size of your screen. So make sure you give yourself enough time before class for it to dry so we can start printing at the beginning of class. All right, have a great weekend.